So looks like we've got John. Must be Julie Andrews. Are you welcome? Good afternoon, everybody. So the meeting is resumed, and we are up to item 11.7 on the agenda, which is hearings on the options to fund Civic Precinct Te Manawataki or Te Papa. And we've got a number of submitters wanting to be heard. So in order of submission numbers, have we got Rick Little here? No. Greg Brown, there he is. Good morning, Greg. Good afternoon, Greg.
Thank you. Just steady, we're here.
Yep. You know the drill.
Think so. Oh, very loud. It's been an interesting weekend, hasn't it? We've got an All Blacks win, and of course we've had an interesting other matter as well, which is
just a small one.
Which we voted, and we're going to be voting again soon, I suspect. But the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act, reading it, I've made notes on my phone because I think I'm a young person and they all do that. So, the main objective seems to be support infrastructure enabling housing and urban development. Other projects that could be funded include certain community projects, and I guess this is one of those. And I'm just wondering if it's going to be affected at all by the new government, or if it's sort of a different sphere that will cover that, because, you know, is that going to be a major concern for them? Then really the priority is going to be housing, but that's really an aside. As to the method of funding the CBD projects, I guess it comes down whether you want to sort of state clearly about who's going to actually pay for this, the ratepayer on their rates, or the ratepayer via separate payment to the IFF. And I do tend to think that a financially prudent household, or even a business, they would probably not want to get into pretending that it had less debt by taking out multiple mortgages or financing deals from separate sources just to enter or to make themselves believe that they were financially sustainable, or to shuffle around repayments that might eventually catch up with them, also that they could go into more overall debt that was off balance sheet and spend more. So those are my thoughts on that. When I look at the project overall, the maps that show the 1.5 billion of private investment do actually include a government department investment, such as a courthouse development. And already we've seen a proposal to remit the development impact fees for those developments as well. And I feel that if that does go ahead, and I hope it doesn't, then the group that will have to fund the difference is probably ratepayers. So, and I think that ratepayers have sort of copped enough over the last few years, with rates up about 53% on average, debt up 73%. And we've seen the Commission having to go to government saying that growth really here is impossible without government investment, just like sort of we had to do in the past as well. And some of the things we suffered from was government dithering and delaying and downsizing the Northern Arterial, and then the FAR mucking around with that rate and its share of other local roads and transport projects. But getting back to the IFF, there's also another principle, and I think that's a principle of of openness or transparency. And I think when you read some of the submissions, many of the submitters, many of the community don't really comprehend that it's they who will still be doing the paying. They don't want to pay CBD for whatever reason, and they've selected the IFF because they don't want it on their rates. They perhaps don't realise that they'll still have to pay something called a levy that is actually separate. So it's a bit smoke and mirrorish in my opinion. A further consideration is the interest rate, and I couldn't quite get to the bottom of that, but it looks to me, and you can correct me later if I'm wrong, that the IFF interest rate is going to be greater than that what council can borrow at. And the other thing is that in regards to using the IFF, it will mean that you've got a bit more headroom on your balance sheet to increase debt and to, in essence, allow council to spend or borrow more at a time when probably most groups aren't doing that. So I think that, in conclusion, that we don't have to be financial geniuses, and I include myself in that. I'm not a financial genius at all, but to know that the IFF deal is less obvious to ratepayers than showing it for what it really is, in my opinion, which is a rates increase. And as well as that, it's also more expensive to look at it. So I would like you to just call it what it is, because it matters not what something is called, but what it actually is. So I see it more than, it's not so much a rose by any other name, but a rate by any other name. So that's just my little conclusion and my feelings on it. So yeah, there you go.
Thanks very much. Any questions? Yeah, Bill?
Thanks, Chair. Greg, in terms of the matters you've raised about IFF, is it just particularly in respect of Te Manawa or Te Papa, or the use of IFF generally? I just wanted to tease that out a little bit.
It's probably the use generally, but obviously being the topic being the CBD. But yes, I think it can sometimes get you out of a bind, with certain things, but I think they should be, we should be very careful what projects we use it for, and not this one in particular. I don't think it justifies that. I would rather see that everybody knew clearly what they were paying for and through a rate. Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? We have already, your point about the Act, we have already used it for transport. So, and my understanding is that the incoming government is quite keen to see it used far more widely than the original.
Yeah. I did read the transport bit as well. Yeah. But,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. So do we have Chudley Haggart here? Thank you. Would you like to come up and just, I'm not sure, just make sure that that button is green, and you've got 5 minutes, Mr. Haggart, sorry. The floor is yours.
Right, well, should have got a red button.
Oh, just push it. Is it green? Yep.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad of this opportunity, but I have to say I'm disturbed. I'm really disturbed about what's been happening in Tauranga over the last few years. The people of this town, the ratepayers, simply can't afford all these grandiose plans. And for council to hold a meeting on whether we should fund a particular project this way or that way is like asking somebody, would they prefer to be shot or hung, without actually asking them, do they want to die? And this is a situation I feel that the ratepayers are in. We have a city where the downtown area, the CBD, is collapsing before our very eyes. None of the fancy touchy-feely projects that have gone in the town have done anything but spend ratepayers' money. And this is just another disaster. Nobody asked for cycle lanes and bus lanes and the extra costs incurred on Cameron Road. And when I say anybody, I mean the people that are paying for it, the ratepayers. And I believe that this is just another project that the ratepayers can ill afford, will bring the Tauranga city closer to actual bankruptcy. And I think that those kind of decisions, no matter how good the plan is or bad the plan is, should be made by the ratepayers, the people who are going to pay for it, and not be a decision of commissioners and council staff who have no vested interest in the city at all, apart from their jobs. And this, brings me quickly to the economy of any place, whether it's a town, whether it's a region, or whether it's a whole country, depends on its people, because its people buy and sell things, manufacture things, import and export things, rent things, provide services, provide goods by growing them. Whatever they do, the money goes round and round, and that is your economy. But unfortunately, we can't say the same thing for councils, whether it be the district council, as we are here in a building that we shouldn't be paying for, because the tasks that it does is not needed by the ratepayers of Tauranga, and yet every ratepayer pays $600 for the privilege of the Bay Planning Council to spend money. It's not right. It's just simply not right. And if you have a situation where local authorities in particular, if you look at them seriously and in reality, they're just leeches on the rest of the economy. They take all the money out of the economy. They don't produce anything. They don't give us anything back for it. Some people might say that if the council is spending money with its staff, etc., then the money is going round and round, but it's not, because the ratepayers aren't getting any benefit from it. The staff are. And even if that money goes back into the shops, into the rentals, into the homes, it came from there in the first place. It's just going back. So I'm really, really confused on how a statutory body like yourselves, as commissioners, can actually do this. To my mind, as commissioners, your fundamental job was to make sure that there was water at my doorstep, that my rubbish got taken away, that the facilities owned by me, the ratepayers, were actually looked after and cared for, and that the roads and the infrastructure was capable of doing its job. None of these seem to be prime objectives to you, with all due respect, the commissioners, nor council staff, who just seem to go on and on and on with bigger and bigger projects, which requires them to employ more and more and more people for things that we can't afford as ratepayers. And one of the big things, I believe, where the problem lies is that while council staff may be doing their due diligence, when they look at the affordability of projects, they look at the government's average, if you say, of incomes for people of New Zealand, and they look at an average of 60 or 70 odd thousand. What they forget to do is they forget to look at that average with the top 5% of earners removed. With the top 5% of earners removed, the average drops to less than $30,000. Now that $30,000, Madam Chair, right, is barely enough to get by on in today's world. With extra costs from council charges, the $600 from the regional council is a disaster to most people. The 40% of people who are on fixed incomes in this town simply will have to move. And with them goes most of the city and its experience. So I'm concerned, Madam Chair, that this is a project too far, and that council should seriously consider, and perhaps get together a group of ratepayers to discuss it further and decide which they believe is currently affordable and a need as apart from a want.
Thank you very much. Any questions? No. Thank you, and thank you for coming along today.
That's right. Thank you for the opportunity.
Julie Andrews. Welcome, Julie. So just make sure you press that button green.
Yes, it's already green.
Thank you.
Yep, kia ora. Thank you for the opportunity. My submission supports rates funding over the IFF funding. Either way, the ratepayer is going to pay, and for me, the main consideration is that the IFF levy funding will be more expensive than rates funding because it involves private finance and the interest rate would be higher. In terms of the argument that it's fairer to charge a levy because it's more transparent and spread over a longer period, I don't understand why that couldn't be done using the rating mechanism, because it could be shown as a separate line item and you have the discretion to determine what the repayment curve looks like. And there was just one last matter that I wanted to clarify because it was a question that arose at one of the public meetings, I think, and it was just about whether or not a ratepayer's property could be sold for non-payment of the levy in the same way that it can be sold for non-payment of rates. And I just wanted to confirm with you that it's one and the same. You would be able to use the debt recovery process and ultimately a mortgagee sale for the levy.
I'm assuming that would be the case. It's such a rare occasion, I don't think.
Yeah, we haven't ever used it, and it would, under the legislation, the debt sits with the Crown Infrastructure Partner, but you're right, it's very similar to what the powers under the rate.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a levy that the council's, but it's an amount that the council's paying to the Crown Infrastructure. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. That was my submission.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. Any questions for Julie? No. No. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Glenn. Arthur, sorry. We see you. I didn't mean to be rude.
No, not at all. Kia ora. Yeah, I thought I'd start off by just reminding you that I have been here, I think I remember 3 different times sitting here and saying how good the consultation has been on various projects. And I remember the Automortai spatial plan and the accessible streets and so on. I would have to say with this, I have a bit of a problem with it, and our trust does not see this as a very informative consultation process, right back to the initial LTP discussion around the civic centre. And I think the problem that I see is that it's right from the start, people have been confused about what ratepayers are paying for and what they're not paying for. And the impression has been given, and as I think you might recall, staff from the council confirmed that to our trust that the initial consultation, which was given quite a lot of detail around one of the options and not a lot around another option, was very misleading, because it sort of gave the indication that ratepayers would have to pay a significant percentage for the smaller scale civic development compared to the larger scale. And the only reason for doing that was, in the end, confirmed that it just was what the external funding component would be for various things. And in the end, my understanding from staff is that the key thing there, it's not the Three Waters funding, it's not anything else, it's just that TECT has limited their contribution to the museum exhibition centre as opposed to the library. So putting that aside, basically what the ratepayers should have been told was that pretty much everything else, all the other funding, from Three Waters funding, from sale of parking buildings, sale of other land and assets, all of that could be either used to pay off debt, just like Mayor Brown is saying in Auckland, or could be used to fund extra facilities. So our trust has had certain views on what the priorities are around the city. We're prioritising sustainable infrastructure and so forth. And that's a wider discussion. But in terms of this, what we've said is, number one, it should be the most transparent process. And we don't think it is, based on our reading, having just gone through a number of those submissions, where people who were supporting option one gave all sorts of reasons that logically could have just as easily or more easily supported option two. So they were saying, we don't want higher ratepayer, the rates are already high enough. We want to choose the IFF because the council says this is better, and so therefore we'll choose that. If you add up all those reasons, I'd be surprised if you didn't end up with a very different slanting from that than just the straight numbers. And I think the staff, to be honest, in this case, did a bit of a disservice in terms of not enough analysis of the submissions, because what was said is more important than just the sheer numbers of it. And I think that also comes to the second reason, which is when you're actually, using a government, legitimately using a government mechanism to effectively get around the debt limit that government initially imposed, it seems like a really circuitous kind of route. And you'd only want to do that if you've got a distinct benefit. And that sort of comes to the third reason our trust does not support using the IFF in this case, which is that fundamentally it's going to cost more. And we've, as some of the staff would know, we've done the Lagoima request to try and find out the information about the transport system levy, and we know the government has said you can't disclose the financial details, but you can do the maths and you can see how much we're paying back for that one, 525 million over the 30-year period, and you can work backwards and figure out what the rates are roughly, and you can quite clearly, and you'll know all the details, and you know that it's going to cost more. And our argument is, when you have a bit of debt headroom, I know this situation looks bad. I know there's very high debt. I know there's very significant costs coming our way with Three Waters under the new government that we'll probably have to pick up more of the tab there. But there's still headroom to fund us through the rates funded debt mechanism. And it just seems that is a far better, more cost effective option. Why would we load up the same ratepayers with more money to pay back when you voluntarily could choose to keep the interest rate lower? It's a shame it didn't happen a year or two ago, and it would have been even probably better to do a bit of a long-term funding deal if that's your goal. But certainly you could just do the usual council debt funding, and that would be a lot better deal for everyone. It'd be more transparent, and you wouldn't get this confusion where people in the community are thinking, oh, great, we're sweet, won't even submit. IFF, council says that's better, and then they're going to get shocked. They're going to see on their line item next to the TSP levy, they'll see a civic centre levy. So we don't see much going for this, and we think maybe use it in the future when you really need to for some of the growth infrastructure, but certainly not now when you don't need to use it.
Thanks, Glenn. The only thing I'd say to you is the government, it's not my understanding that the government doesn't put our debt level on. It's the local government funding authority that sets the level of debt.
Right.
You can't say, but
yes, thanks for that clarification. I guess I was pointing to if central government could have tweaked that mechanism.
Yeah.
And
the authority did over COVID.
Yep.
Did lift it, but then brought it back
Bring
down.
it back, yeah.
And that's to keep your Standard and Poor's or your credit.
Yeah, keep everyone happy. Yeah.
All right, any questions for Glenn? Yep, Phil.
Thanks, Glenn. And it was just a clarification that I asked earlier on in terms of Greg's submission. And you may have answered as you work through your submission, but just for the sake of clarity, the concern of the trust is in respect of the use of IFF for this particular project, as opposed to concerns over the wider IFF approach.
We're more concerned the wider application of IFF on the grounds of the cost, the extra cost imposed on ratepayers from using it.
Regardless of what the project is.
Yeah, I think the only justification we would see for using it at all would be if you get to the point where you have no headroom and you have essential infrastructure you have to deliver. I mean, then and I'm thinking through to potential around Three Waters. If the central government doesn't come to the party around Three Waters funding, then potentially TCC in 2, 3, 5 years might need to look at some serious, debt around that, which might need an IFF mechanism. But until then, we would say don't do it because it costs more. So why would one do it?
Thank you.
Paul just reminded me, so at this stage of the hearings that are break it down, when it comes back for deliberation, we will have a better breakdown of the details.
Yeah, and luckily you'll get to see the confidential information, even if we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Green.
Thank you.
Paul Caroline? Paul here? No? John Robson? Welcome. John, you know the routine, the green button, and you've got 5 minutes. Thanks.
Oh, you mean I can't get a primer or something just to help me out? Thank you. Look, I hope everyone had a nice weekend. I know some people have had a nice weekend and some people didn't. It's been an interesting weekend. And at the moment, there's a hell of a lot of post-match analysis taking place. For what it's worth, in terms of the big match of the weekend, and obviously I'm not talking rugby or cricket, I think what comes out of that is a reminder that you're not a leader if people aren't following you. That if you want to have a position as leaders, then you must take your community with you. And as I used to say to my colleagues, and Marty's heard this before, that getting a decision across the line in a meeting is not winning. Winning is your decision surviving the next election. And what we're about to see, I think, over the next few months as a country is a lot of time and energy spent unwinding decisions that were imposed without community support, i.e. people addressing a significant failure of leadership. And that's sad. And I'm not a fan of either the blue team or the red team, although I would note that the blue team and the red team have got their lowest score for something like 20 years, the lowest combined score for about 20 years, which is an indictment on both of them, by blue and red, obviously I mean National and Labour. Anyway, good governance understands the need to take the community with them. And because of that, good governance consults with integrity. It's really important that good governance consults with integrity. People do not like being lied to. And to be very clear, lying by omission is still lying. Paltering is lying. It's an attempt to deceive people. Lying by obfuscation is no better. Yeah, muddying things up in such a way that people aren't clear on what the decision is in front of them. I have a background in consultancy. Good consultancy relies on good research, relies on facts and information. I had an interesting interaction recently with a member of the local media, pointing out to them that politicians and journalists are amongst the least respected people in our community, and they said that was an opinion. I pointed out, no, it was in fact a fact supported by research. There's a difference between opinion and fact. It is a fact that politicians are pretty low on the respect ladder, along with journalists. My background, and I still see myself as a consultant, someone who really likes to work in that space. And there's an old joke in the research space that when people are sort of quoting research, that they're using it the same way a drunk uses a lamppost, more for support than illumination. Given how crooked the lamppost is that you're about to be looking at your meeting after you get your report, I would suggest that it can't be relied on for either. I've made an effort to go through all the submissions, and I thank you for publishing them all, and in a format that made it very easy for me to put into an Excel spreadsheet, turn into a code frame and do analysis, which, as you know, is a skill set that I have. I'm also financially literate, which I remember the DIA saying wasn't a gift that was shared by the commissioners, but let's move on. It seems to me that in this case, the lamppost has actually been built by drunks. The alternative is disconcerting. The alternative is that the lamppost is crooked by design. And Marty, I have experience of staff withholding information over Greaton and withholding information over Mission Street and providing misleading information to the community on the cost of the walkway between Memorial Park and the Strand. And I'm quite forgiving in this. Staff operate under enormous pressure. They're enormously pressured by what you commissioners are trying to do in the time frame you voluntarily acceded to, which was ridiculous. But it's starting to look like a culture. It's starting to go from error to culture. And that's also an indictment on governance. Look, you've got a report coming. I would hope that you read carefully the comments on the report. But I'm just going to speak to one comment made by one person who's actually a very strong supporter of Te Manawa-Take o Te Papa. Really wants it to go ahead and really upset with those terrible self-serving councillors, those narcissistic Eustace councillors that brought the city to the state it's in, right? So this is a person who has your back. And they, commenting on the research, the quote's in there, you can find it if you look. I'd like to think you've read it, my submission. The quote is basically, and along the lines of, that person is embarrassed. They feel that you've insulted them by producing a piece of work that is misleading, that is based on fear, that, if you like, lacks integrity. That's from a supporter of Te Manawa-Take o Te Papa. I couldn't agree with them more.
Okay, thank you very much. I do find it ironic to be lectured on good governance by a member of a council that was dismissed by government because they were not good governors. So thank you very much.
And that minister was sacked by the people of New Zealand this weekend.
Doesn't justify the actions of the previous council.
You're outside the rules of engagement of this sort of submission.
And
you're
so
outside it.
And so are you.
Sorry, I'm not.
Thank you.
Yeah. See you at the election, Anne.
No, you won't.
Because you're gone.
Okay. So that brings to an end. We have no more submitters. Do we not have Mr. Callanan hasn't arrived or Mr. Little? So in that case, I will declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much. Yes, we're going to finish with the colour gear.
Tēnā tātou, kia koera e, me o mana, whakahaere nei tēnei koe, kia koera māti, koutou katoa, tātou katoa, pōkitai nei tēnā koe ka tēnā koe. Koe, tōre kēnei tata. Te atua nei anō rā mātou, e koe tahi nei, ka tuku anō rā ngā whakamunitina whakawhetai ki au. Nau I arehina mai a tātou rioto I nei mahi, kia whai hoa, kia whai hurahi tika, mā tātou, te hapuri whānui, me wā tātou whānau wiki. Rere te atua mana ki te ala tātou a te rau wiki ka koe tahi anō. Tēnei mātou, sinei kia koe, tōru ki tōna tātou whānui.